Alright there guys, and welcome back to another video. Today it is time for Let's Talk About Suzume, released in 2022. Now, I'm not sure if this movie is directed by the same person, but I'm fairly sure it's got the same animation studio working on it that also worked on Your Name and Weathering with You. This movie feels like it was made... I think it was the same person who directed those two movies also directed this one. Because this movie also follows the same sort of themes that the other two did. Natural disasters affecting Japan. Or I guess you could say unnatural disasters. Because Weathering with You was about extreme floods. Your Name was about a meteor, and we'll get into what happens in Suzume. So, the movie begins with a little girl wandering through a very magical looking field with an incredible skyline, looking for her mom. And she's crying because she's alone, and she's scared. I mean, why wouldn't you be? She's a kid and she's all alone. She wants her mom. Of course she's going to start crying. But somebody comes up behind her and she thinks it's her mom. Now, we find out right at the end of the movie that it wasn't, but she thinks that it is at the time. Then we fast forward into the present, where our main character, Suzume, who the movie is named after, is making her way to school on her bicycle, and she goes past this guy who she believes she's met before, but she doesn't know where. So she goes past him, and then he calls out to her. He asks her, "Are there any ruins around this town?" And Suzume tells her yes, actually there are some ruins, and tells him where they are, roughly where they are. So he makes his way there, and she continues making her way to school. But she just can't resist going back to see why he wanted to see the ruins. So she decides to leave her journey to school and go back to the ruins where she told the guy to go. She goes there, and he said he was looking for a door. She goes there, ends up going to the very middle of the ruins, and in the very middle is a door in the middle of a very, very shallow body of water, like super shallow, to where it doesn't even go up all the way up to her feet. It's that shallow. She opens the door, and the magical world that we saw at the very beginning is exactly what is through the door. She goes through the door, but she doesn't end up in the magical world. She just goes through the door like you'd open any other door. But she turns around and the magical world is still there in the door frame. So she goes back through it again, and it happens again. She just goes through the door normally. She doesn't get transported. So she decides to... So then, just before she leaves, a little cat statue appears on the floor. She picks it up, and then it turns into an actual cat. And then it runs away. So she ends up going to school like normal. But she can see a cloud of red smoke in the distance, and she tells her two friends to go to look at it outside. But they can't see it. No one can see the red smoke cloud forming apart from Suzume. Then everybody gets a notification on their phone about an incoming earthquake. She heads back to the ruins that she found the door at, and realizes that the cloud of red smoke is coming from that very door, and the guy she saw earlier is trying to close the door. And with her help, they managed to close it. But in trying to close the door, the guy ends up getting ends up getting a cut on his arm. So Suzume takes him back to her house to bandage him up. And as she's doing so, there's a little white cat, very similar to the one that ran away from Suzume earlier on. The cat introduces himself as Sajin. And basically tells the guy who finally tells it as his name. He tells Suzume his name is Sota, and the cat turns him into a chair. Because there was this chair that Suzume has in her room, which is like her most prized possession. Because her mom built that chair for her from scratch. But it only has 3 legs instead of 4. But she still treasures it as her most prized possession. Since her mom has actually died when she was very young, so she has been living with her aunt for the last 12 years. But now Sota has literally become this chair. So Sajin runs away, and the two of them go chasing after him, and they end up on a ferry. And news spreads. The pictures and videos of Sajin swarm social media, and he appears everywhere on Twitter, and even on Instagram. So the two of them go after him, and Sota finally explains to Suzume that the red so-called clouds of smoke are actually worms who cause earthquakes. That's the natural disaster that threatening Japan in this movie. Although it's not natural, because these earthquakes are not happening randomly, they're being purposely created by these worms coming out of these gates. And the only way to fully seal them off is with gemstones. And Suzume and Sota, for the whole movie, think that Sajin is one of the gemstones. Keystones, even. But he's not. But they don't know that, so they keep chasing after him. They end up going far away from where the movie starts. They end up in Kobe. And this, of course, worries Suzume's aunt, because she doesn't know where Suzume has gone, as she never told her where she was going. So she ends up going to Kobe and finds some more ruins. And she was brought to these ruins by a girl called Chika, who went to elementary school where the ruins happen to be, as the school is now long since abandoned. But there's another worm in there, so Sota and Suzume have to go and close it, and they successfully do so. When Suzume's aunt finally finds out where she is, she happens to run into Sota's friend, Shirazawa, who Suzume also ran into earlier on in the movie. He, along with Sota, are basically becoming they're in training to become teachers. He ends up tagging along for the ride and starts looking for Suzume, and then her aunt ends up running into both of them. So after the second of the worms had been shut, every time they go to sleep, they both start having dreams. Suzume keeps having a dream about herself as a child in that magical world, which Sota tells her is called the Ever After. It's where souls go to rest. Then they see an amusement park. There's an amusement park that was shown much earlier in the movie, and when I was watching it, I was thinking, that's definitely gonna have a worm come out of it later on, isn't it? And to no surprise at all, that's exactly what happens. That ends up being the next location of a worm that needs to be sealed away. But it's not in just any old random door. It's in one of the carriages of a Ferris wheel. And in this Ferris wheel, Suzume actually walks into the carousel itself because she thinks she can see something. But what she can see and what she's actually doing is actually very different. She nearly walks straight out of the carousel while it's in motion, because the power had been turned back on with Sota as a chair chasing down Sajin, the cat. They finally managed to get it shut, but at the expense of Sota sacrificing himself. He becomes a keystone to to try and stop any more worms getting out. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. Then they end up heading off to Tokyo, and that's where Shirazawa catches up to her, and also her aunt finally finds her. Then we meet a second cat, a much bigger black cat called Sadajin, who is the other keystone. So they head off to Tokyo, and a huge worm starts to break out, and it starts hovering all over the top of Tokyo, of Tokyo, which of course ain't a good thing. But no one else apart from Suzume and Sota, well, not anymore because Sota's inside of the Ever After. Only Suzume, Sajin, and Sadajin can see it, and in order to destroy it, that's where Suzume had to turn Sota into a gem, into a keystone, to push the worm back into the gate. But this actually ends up making Suzume start falling, so Sajin ends up turning into a much bigger cat, grabbing hold of Suzume as they land in a river. And then she ends up waking up in a cave. Which is where her Serizawa and her aunt set off back to her hometown where she was born and lived with her mom, and where her mom built the chair that Sota has become for her. She arrives at the final wormhole as she needs to try and break Sota out. She goes back down into this cave, and this is where she finally manages to open a gate into the Ever After, go through the door, and actually end up in the Ever After. While she's there, she's trying to break out Sota, and Sadajin is fighting the final worm, who's bigger than every other worm that they've sealed off so far. She's even willing to sacrifice herself and become a keystone in order to save Sota and make him human again. Sajin also joins in and helps, as he wasn't actually creating these wormholes like they thought he was the whole time. He was actually leading them to the wormholes in order for them to seal them back off. He was actually trying to help. He was actually helping them the whole time. And when they get to the final one, they're trying to break out Sota. And then they finally get the opportunity, and Sota is finally turned back into a human. And the only way to truly finish this worm off is for Suzume and Sota to grab Sajin and Sadajin, as they both turn into these frozen spikes. They both hold on to one of them each and shove the spike into the wormhole, the worm, which destroys it. Then Suzume notices in the distance a little girl. This little girl is the younger version of her from the very beginning of the movie, and that woman that she saw at the beginning of the movie is revealed to actually be her from the present. It's the present version of herself talking to the young version of herself. And as the young version of herself goes back out of the door from the Ever After, back into the real world, she looks back and sees Suzume and Sota in the distance. So the ending ties all the way back into the beginning. Now, and that's how the movie comes to an end. So I actually really I quite enjoyed this movie, but I wouldn't say out of this, Weathering with You and Your Name, I would not say this is the best of the lot. It was nominated for some awards though, so critics clearly love this movie. Personally, I'd say it's second when it comes to my out of the three. I'd say I still think Weathering with You is just a little bit better than this movie, but I still did enjoy this movie. And that will conclude this video. Hope you guys have enjoyed. If you have, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and next week's video is going to be on another anime movie, and one I've been very excited for a little while now, and I can't wait to go watch it. But until we meet again, catch you later.